That's the Sheish Mitzvahs Tmidius in general, which brings us to the very first mitzvah, the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. Although it's a Machloikes Rishonim, the pashtus is that we hold that this is indeed a mitzvah sesa, and not just Hashem identifying himself, but there's a mitzvah d'oraisa of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, to recognize that. Recognize it. Recognize that there's a Bari Olam. Hashem Elokecha, but Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. So what's included in this mitzvah? So the first thing the Rambam says, Motzui Rishon, first source. You have to be aware of the fact that there's first source. This already is a philosophical issue. We'll get back to it a little bit later. But you have to recognize that there's one source to all that exists, and that's the Bari Olam. Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. So the Chinuch and the Ramban are busy being mafarish that part of the pasuk. And the Chinuch pretty much says it. Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim doesn't just mean the philosophical issue of did the world always exist or is there a creator. Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim means, first of all, that there's hashgacha. That Hashem is the one that is responsible for events. That things don't just happen. Hashgacha. But even more than that. Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. Why did Hashem take us out of Mitzrayim? Why? Why? The Rambam, in his Yud Gimel Ikrim, counts as one of the Ikrim, Emunah in Bias HaMashiach. Not only that, but he adds to it something that we don't find in any of the other Ikrim. And that is a tzipiyah liyeshua. Afal pishi yismamea, im kol za achakaloi. Achakaloi. We're anticipating the coming of Mashiach. It's not enough to know that he's coming, you have to anticipate it. So everybody asks the kasha, where did the Rambam get this from? So the Rambam, if you take a look in the Rambam himself, so he says there, how do I know that Mashiach's coming? Because the pasuk in Chumash, v'tzimi at kitim, in the nevuah of Bilam, of Achrus Hayomim, he's describing Bias HaMashiach. No, that became from the nevuah of Bilam, which is a pasuk in Chumash. You got to believe in the whole Chumash. So Memela, you have to believe in that one also. Memela, we know that Mashiach's coming. From that, it became an ikr, including a mitzvah of anticipating. So the Smak in the Sefer Mitzvah Kotzer explains that that's all included in Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. Asher Yitzeisecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim means that there's purpose, that there's a tachlis to creation. It means that when Hashem created the world, he's got a tachlis. He's got an idea in mind. And that's why Klal Yisrael was taken out of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because it fits into the purpose. So that means that Emunah, the mitzvah of Emunah, is coming to the realization that Aleph, there's a Bari Olam, Beis, that there's Hashgacha, and Gimel, there's purpose. There's purpose to existence. There's a creator who has an agenda, and that's why we're here, and he's going to make sure that it comes about. Understandably, if we understand that our purpose is set out by Hashem, that the world has to come to the perfection that is described in Achrus Hayomim, that you anticipate that. Hashem created the world for a purpose, so we wait for that to happen. You take a look at the world and it doesn't match the beauty of Achrus Hayomim. So we anticipate. This is not what the world was created for. The world is now in a state of confusion. We're waiting for the day that the world reaches its shleimus, which was the tachlis, and that's going to happen in Achrus Hayomim. So this is the outline. So now we have to ask ourselves, okay, so you have to know this. How are you supposed to know this? The mitzvah is to get this into yourself. How do you get this into yourself? There's a very fundamental machloikes rishonim with regard to the yesod of Emunah. The Kuzari already discusses the issue of what he calls Emunah and Chakira. People generally, and I think a bit simplistically, translate this as a shaila of emunah, of acceptance, what people call faith. And chakira means an intellectual investigation. Chakira, using logic. And the Kuzari is in favor of emunah. The Rambam's in favor of chakira, the Chovos HaLevavos is in favor of chakira, the Chinuch says that chakira is a maila. There's a Shulti Agiborim. You shouldn't do chakira. It's dangerous. So let's first talk about emunah. What do we mean by emunah? If you learn the Albo in the Sefer Ikrim, he describes emunah. Emunah does not mean acceptance. The truth is the Kuzari is pretty clear on this also. Emunah does not mean acceptance. That's not one of the options. What people call emunah pshuta is not emunah pshuta. It's what the Rambam calls emunah tfeila. Emunah pshuta, which is a wonderful thing, does not mean, I believe. How do I know? First of all, because the Albo says so, but better than that. If there's no basis for believing, so why not believe in anything? Why believe that there are mitzvahs? Why believe that there's a chiyuv of emunah? Why believe anything? A mitzvah, believe, accept, finished. Second, we're Yidden. And if you know anything about what it means to be a Yid, we don't accept anything. A Yid has to be mafalpul in everything. So what's emunah pshuta? What is emunah all about? Emunah means there's a Messiah. Emunah means this has been handed down from generation to generation. It's been handed down that the entire Klal Yisrael stood at the foot of Har Sinai and heard Onoichi v'lo was royas hakoilis. Emunah in Yetzias Mitzrayim, this was passed on midor dor. Emunah, according to the Albo, means taking the time to think through, does this make sense? Aleph, what are your sources? In other words, these people that have handed it down, are these people you can be saimach on? And Beis, what they're telling you, is that something that can make sense? Because as he puts it, even if the most reliable person on earth tells you something, if what he tells you is illogical, then how can you accept it? It's not shaykh to accept. The two Tanaim, what they're telling you has to make sense, and you have to verify, like, what are my sources? Where am I getting it from? Now, in what I'm trying to tell you here, you may ask yourselves, does that mean that most Orthodox Jews are not maminim because they haven't really thought through this process? Chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom. The fact that most people don't articulate the whole process doesn't mean that this hasn't gone on in their minds. And maybe let's articulate this for ourselves. Why does your average frum Yid, Taka, why does he believe? Why does he accept? Why does he know that there's a Borei Olam? What is it that gets us all to be so sure of ourselves? It's a combination of things. The very first thing is the fact that we are familiar with the caliber of the people that our nation has. Before you get to the stories of what the Vilna Gaon was like, people that we get to know, we know the kinds of people that Klal Yisrael respects. Be it big people that are famous, be it fine Pashat Balabatim that are full of Yiras Shamayim, integrity, the kinds of people that I guess they do write stories about today, but in the olden days they didn't bother because they were the Pashat Yidden. Certainly when you're talking about the big people, Rosh Yeshivas, Rabbonim, big Talmidei Chachamim, between their level of understanding, their intellect, and their integrity, we understand this is not Vava Maisis. We're talking about these are people of integrity that are passing this on. That's number one. These are people that you can trust. Second of all, what is it that they're passing on? Like, what's the agenda? I was once teaching in a seminary for Balas Tshuva. I was teaching a beginner's class in halacha. I don't know why they chose the subject. It happened to have been Tfilas Kalim. This class was a beginner's halacha class. It came right after a class on Emunah. They were learning the various proofs of Hashem, of Torah Misinai. So I started giving the class, the whole structure, the halachas, the chi of tefillah, the dinim of chatzitza and tefillah of a keli, what is chaitzis, what is not chaitzis, the details, endless detail, the kind of kelim that need tefillah, the kind of kelim that don't need tefillah. So one of the women there speaks up and she says, the class we had before this was totally unnecessary. All you had to do was teach us this. Who on earth would come up with this if it weren't true? If you look at the millions of details in halacha, you have a choice. It's one of two things. It's either that you are dealing with the genius of the Rabbeinu Shalom or some absolute madman that made it up. It's one or the other. There's nothing in between. There's just nothing in between. It's got to be one or the other. So now you have your choice. So once again, for me to say that Gedolei Yisrael, now let's talk about the Goyim. That the genius of the Vilna Goyim, the genius of the Goyim, whether you're learning a Bir Agra and Choshen Mishpat, going through it, the genius of the man, not to mention the deeper Svarim. Okay, something a little closer to earth, although still light miles ahead of us, Reb Kiva Eger. You read a Tshuvas Reb Kiva Eger, where every line is genius. And then at the end he says, he's writing this Bechipazon. He didn't really have time to think it through. So, one thing is clear. These people were not fooled by a madman. Nor were people generations before them. Generations before them. Were they fooled by some madman? And someone would really have to be crazy to come up with it. Now, these are things that go on in our subconscious. We recognize that we're dealing with a system that is so full of detail and so full of chokhmah. The areas that are not beyond us, the things that we can understand. A svara in Nashim and Ezekiel. These are things where we can appreciate the genius. The truth is we're allowed to because the Torah says so. Ki chachmaschem, it says even leinei amim. Everyone can understand. Everyone can understand that this is chachma, this is brilliant. So yes, we have something that we were makavel midor dor. It had to have been written either by the genius of the Bari Olam or the alternative. Simply looking at the people that handed it down midor dor, we appreciate this is real, this is true, there is a Bari Olam. In the Torah itself, the Chumash gives you a proof, not just of the Bari Olam, but of the Chumash itself. The Torah says, Hashama Om, has there ever been a complete nation that claimed to have witnessed something? All the religions that talk about some revelation, a visitation from the deity, whoever it is that they believe in, they talk about this Yachid saw it and that Yachid saw it. We're the only people that make a claim that all of Klal Yisrael, Anoshim Noshim V'Taf, Mikotin Vad Godel, everybody witnessed not only Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf, but Matan Torah. And it was written in the Torah and in the Chumash, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu gave it to them. He gave it to all of Klal Yisrael. There were people there, the ones that were younger, that didn't die in the Midbar, and all of those that didn't die in the Midbar. They got the Sefer Torah. That means Moshe Rabbeinu was presenting it to the people that witnessed it. Had this book shown up somewhere at a later point, then the question would have been, 1 second, how come it wasn't here before? It says it was given to the people that witnessed it. The Sefer itself says it. These are things that we take as Dvarim Pshutim. Some are written in the Chumash, some are just inscribed in our minds. The system is wholesome. The system covers absolutely every area of life, everything. So, once again, going back to the elbow, in terms of the integrity of the people that are handing it down, as well as in terms of the wholesomeness of what they're handing down. Every Yid's got it. Excuse me. Every Yid's got it. Whether he articulates it or not, he's got it. That's Emunah. That's Emunah. Emunah is not, oh, I believe, I accept. Not for a Yid, that's not acceptable. That the Rambam calls Emunah Tefillah. Part of the mitzvah of Emunah is to articulate it so that you appreciate the basis for it. And you get it into yourself. Chakira. So to go through a whole long process of Chakira, there are time constraints here. But just a very basic understanding of the message given over by the Shara Yichud, by the Rambam. A very, very basic thing. If we're talking about Emunah in the Rabbeinu Shalom, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? The alternative is what? Avodah Zarah? Okay, let's say. But let me explain what I mean by let's say, Khalil. Once we have our Mesorah and we know it's absolutely emes, anyone that holds that there's a mitzvah of Chakira, they're not saying that a Yid's supposed to say, I don't know the truth, let me go figure it out. We have a Mesorah. We know it's absolutely emes. What is the mitzvah of Chakira? The mitzvah of Chakira is, now that I know that it's emes, let me now work it out logically as well so that I'm going to have more of a clarkite. I'll have an absolute clarity that it's true. You know, in math, you often have deriving formulas. The formula's there. They use it for Doris. That's the way they send man to the moon. And it works. But, you know, part of the exercise is to derive it. Chakira to a Yid, if one holds of it, is the same thing. It's not that we're saying, no, maybe not. Chas v'sholem. We'll see. It's also to say that. Once your Emunah tells you that it's borer, that our ancestors stood at the foot of Har Sinai, then we don't have any shilas. The mitzvah of Chakira is make it stronger by way of Chakira. So the basic idea of the Chakira is just understanding that all of existence that we could possibly imagine, all of the existence that we've ever experienced and everything that we deal with is finite. That means it has definition, it has dimension. There's no such thing as something without definition or dimension that we are aware of existing, because we couldn't be aware of it otherwise. If it's not defined, so what is it? Even an idea is defined. Defined means this is it and nothing else. This stender over here. It's a stender and nothing else. There's a texture. There's a size. There's a color. It's here now. A minute from now someone can take it away. These are all aspects of it. They're all finite. All the world that we are aware of is finite. Finite means it exists in time. It exists in space. So there's a basic question. Everything finite that we know of has a beginning, because that's its definition. It's got a beginning. If it's got a beginning, so something must have been there before it. Everything is finite, so we have a big problem. So what was there before finite existence? Nothingness, nowhere, never. So where did it all come from? The only way that existence can explain itself is by saying that real existence is something different. It's not finite. It's not something that has a beginning nor an end. It's a whole different quality of existence that we've never seen, and we couldn't. So that would be what we would call infinity, which is what the Rebbeinu Shalom is. When we talk of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that's what we're talking about. The whole concept of Hakira is coming to the realization that all of existence that we know is finite, and therefore it cannot explain itself. Where did it come from and when? And where? No, that's deep. Some Rishonim hold that you should be chayker this. Some Rishonim hold that you shouldn't be chayker this. It probably depends on what you're made of. But once again, that's not what our emunah is based on. That's how you clarify your emunah so it's there deep. That's how you clarify your emunah so that it's really, really something that you're certain of. But it all begins with the Messiah. It all begins with something that we have been taught by those who were taught by those who were taught by those who experienced it. And they were really there. So the mitzvah of Emunah is to make sure that you get that into yourself. And that, if there's a Borei Olam, and he's Mashgiach, Asher Etzisicha, Meretz Mitzrayim, because we were makabel that, then he had a purpose. And you start living with a sense of purpose. And you ask yourself, what is that tachlis? What is that tachlis? And Ramchal, the beginning of Derech Hashem, in the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim, tells us very clearly. You know what the tachlis is? Olam chesed yibane. Hashem created for the sake of doing chesed. It says in the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim, Sheyizbor v'yisametz eitzel ha'adam machay v'asay b'yalamay ha'adam lo nivra elo l'his'aneg al Hashem. Hashem created to do the chesed of giving us closeness to Him. The tainig ha'amiti ha'idin ha'gadol mikol ha'donim she'yicholim li'matzeh. The tachlis is to bring ourselves closer to Him because that's the greatest. That's the tachlis. See, all of this goes into the first mitzvah. That there's a tachlis, that there's a Borei Olam, and that there's a tachlis, and there's hashgacha. And all of our attitudes have to include this. Everything we ever work through, any decision we make, should be with this consciousness of there being a Borei Olam with a tachlis. The tachlis is to give. And therefore, we as His subjects, our tachlis is to receive the Eden HaGadol. What is that Eden HaGadol? Closeness to the Rebbeinu Shalom, which is the greatest, and there's nothing like it. This is a good beginning. We still have much to talk about, but at least understand the definition of the mitzvah. The definition of the mitzvah is tune into the Messiah that we've got. That Klal Yisrael really stood at the foot of Har Sinai and heard Anochi V'Lo. Klal Yisrael experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's a Borei Olam. There's a Tachlis. Live with that attitude when you're making your decisions. Live with that attitude and strengthen that attitude, whether by reviewing your Emunah or whether by way of Chakira. The Chinuch adds, also in the way we talk, the truth is so much of davening. Psukkah de Zimra helps you build your Emunah, a meaningful Psukkah de Zimra, seeing Hashem in the Bria. It helps strengthen your Emunah, meaning making sure that it really becomes part of you, so that you're living with that consciousness. That's the beginning. There's more to come.